In the dangerous mountains of Afghanistan's Kunar province, a military convoy speeds through the desert while soldiers joke around with billionaire genius Tony Stark. Tony is famous for living a flashy lifestyle, building powerful weapons, and enjoying every moment of being rich and successful. One of the soldiers even asks him for a photo, and everything feels relaxed for a moment. But suddenly, gunfire and explosions tear through the convoy. The vehicles are ambushed from every direction. Soldiers desperately try to protect Tony, but they are quickly killed one after another. Terrified, Tony escapes the burning vehicle and hides behind a rock while trying to call his best friend James Rhodes. Then Tony notices something horrifying. A missile lands right beside him, and it carries the logo of his own company, Stark Industries. Before he can react, the missile explodes, throwing him across the desert and leaving him critically injured. When Tony finally wakes up, he realizes he has been captured by a terrorist group called the 10 Rings. After that, the movie flashes back to 36 hours earlier. We are taken to Las Vegas, where the Apogee Awards ceremony is being held. Rhodey introduces Tony to the audience and explains that he is the son of the legendary scientist Howard Stark, who built advanced weapons at a very young age. According to Rhodey, Tony was just as gifted as his father. He built his first circuit board at the age of 4 and his first engine at 6. After Howard Stark passed away, his old friend and business partner Obadiah helped keep the company running. But when Tony returned at the age of 21, he officially became the new CEO of Stark Industries. Under Tony's leadership, the company created smart weapons, advanced robotics, and satellite targeting systems to keep America protected from its enemies. Rhodey then announces that Tony is receiving the prestigious Apogee Award for all his achievements. But Tony never shows up to accept the award because he is busy partying and gambling at a casino. Tony is the kind of guy who loves attention, luxury, and having fun. Rhodey eventually finds him there and asks why he skipped the ceremony. Tony casually tells him that he already has enough awards at home and doesn't need another one. As Tony is leaving the casino, he gets stopped by a reporter from Vanity Fair magazine named Christine Everhart. She asks him a few questions, and later that night, the two spend time together. The next morning, when Christine walks out of Tony's house, she is greeted by Pepper Potts, Tony's loyal assistant who handles almost every part of his schedule and business life. Pepper politely sends Christine out and then reminds Tony that he is supposed to be in another city for an important weapons presentation in Afghanistan. Tony casually replies that since it's his own private jet, it won't leave without him anyway. Soon after, he arrives at Stark Industries, where Rhodey complains that he has been waiting for him for 3 hours. Tony jokes that he was busy giving an interview. A few hours later, they arrive at the Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. There, Tony meets military officials and demonstrates his newest weapon, the incredibly destructive Jericho missile. The test is successful, and everyone is amazed by its power. Tony proudly calls Obadiah to tell him the deal went perfectly, which makes Obadiah very happy. After the presentation, Tony leaves the base with a military convoy. Rhodey also tries to join him, but Tony jokes that there's no room left in the vehicle and tells him to come later in another car. Right after that, Tony's convoy is attacked by the 10 Rings, the same attack we saw at the beginning of the movie. Now held captive inside a cave, Tony is in terrible condition. The 10 Rings are revealed to be a secret terrorist organization operating deep in the mountains. Tony is given painful medical treatment, and when he wakes up again, he notices that wires are connected to a battery attached beside him. Confused, he also realizes that some kind of strange device has been installed in his chest. Tony questions a man nearby named Ho Yinsen. Yinsen explains that he saved Tony's life after the explosion. The blast had sent countless tiny metal fragments into Tony's body, and many of them were moving toward his heart. Yinsen removed as many pieces as he could, but the remaining fragments would have killed Tony within days. To stop that from happening, he built an electromagnet and placed it inside Tony's chest to keep the metal shards away from his heart. Tony is shocked after hearing all this and asks where they are. But before Yinsen can answer, he warns Tony to raise his hands because someone is coming. A man named Abu Bakr enters the cave with several armed members of the 10 Rings. He welcomes Tony and tells him that they want him to build a Jericho missile for them, the same one he demonstrated at the military base. Abu Bakr even shows Tony a photo of the weapon. Tony immediately refuses and says he will never build missiles for terrorists. In response, the group brutally tortures him. They dunk his head into water and drag him outside the cave. There, Tony finally sees that he is trapped somewhere deep within the mountains, far away from civilization. What shocks him even more is the sight of countless weapons made by Stark Industries being used by the terrorists themselves. Abu tells Tony Stark that the 10 Rings already have all the materials needed to build the Jericho missile. He says they can get Tony anything else he needs, and once the missile is finished, they will set him free. But Tony already knows they have no intention of letting him go, so pretending to cooperate, he agrees to build the missile. Tony and Ho Yinsen immediately get to work inside the cave. However, instead of building the Jericho missile, Tony secretly starts creating a small arc reactor using missile parts and scraps of technology. The terrorists believe he is following their orders, but Yinsen quickly realizes Tony is working on something completely different. Curious, he asks Tony what he's actually building. Tony explains that it's a miniature arc reactor, similar to the massive one powering Stark Industries back home. He says that as long as the reactor stays connected to the electromagnet in his chest, the metal fragments inside his body won't reach his heart. Tony also explains how powerful the reactor is, capable of generating enormous amounts of energy every second. Then he reveals his real escape plan by showing Yinsen a rough design for a metal-armored suit. Yinsen is impressed by the idea because he has also been trapped there for years and wants freedom just as badly. Soon, he carefully installs the arc reactor into Tony's chest while the cave's security cameras secretly capture everything they are doing. Later, Tony and Yinsen sit together while continuing to build the suit. Tony asks Yinsen where he's from, and Yinsen tells him about his hometown Gulmira, describing it as a beautiful place. He says that once he escapes, he hopes to see his family again. Tony quietly admits that he doesn't really have a family waiting for him anymore. The two continue working non-stop on the armor. Meanwhile, the Ten Rings leader, Raza, starts realizing that Tony is not building the Jericho missile at all. Suspicious, Raza walks into the workshop and questions Yinsen, demanding to know why the missile still isn't finished after so much time. Yinsen tries to calm him down by saying that Tony is working hard and that building such an advanced weapon takes time. But Raza senses they are hiding something. To intimidate them, his men force Yinsen onto his knees, while Raza threatens him with a burning coal. Seeing this, Tony quickly steps in and tells Raza that Yinsen is important to his work. Raza finally backs off, but before leaving, he warns Tony that he has only until tomorrow to finish the Jericho missile. That entire night, Tony works non-stop and finally completes the first version of the Iron Man suit. Yinsen helps him put on the heavy armor and begins uploading the system data into it. But before the process can finish, Raza notices suspicious activity and sends two men to investigate. The moment they open the door, explosives planted by Tony blow them apart. Raza instantly realizes something is wrong and sends more armed men toward the cave. Inside, Yinsen keeps loading the suit's systems while Tony prepares for the escape. Tony tells Yinsen to hide while he clears a path out of the cave, but the upload is only halfway complete. Knowing they need more time, Yinsen sacrifices himself by grabbing a gun and running outside to distract the terrorists. He fires wildly in every direction, drawing everyone's attention toward him. Unfortunately, Raza's men quickly surround and capture him. At that exact moment, the upload finally completes. Tony powers up the armored suit and bursts out of the cave, attacking the terrorists one by one. The Ten Rings fighters unload endless bullets at him, but the heavy metal armor protects him from everything. Tony keeps moving forward like an unstoppable machine, smashing enemies and destroying weapons in his path. When Tony finally reaches the outside area, he spots Yinsen lying badly wounded on the ground. But before Tony can help him, Raza suddenly attacks. Tony survives the ambush and strikes back, crushing Raza beneath falling rocks. Tony rushes over to Yinsen and tells him they need to escape because he still has to see his family again. But Yinsen sadly reveals the truth. He had lied earlier. His family had already died long ago. He calmly tells Tony not to worry about him because now he will finally get to see them again. Filled with anger and grief after losing his friend, Tony marches outside where the remaining terrorists begin firing at him from every direction. Using flamethrowers built into the suit, Tony burns through enemy fighters, weapons, and stacks of missiles, triggering a massive explosion across the camp. Just before the blast reaches him, Tony uses the suit's rocket power to launch himself into the air and escape. However, after flying a long distance, the damaged armor finally loses control and crashes into the desert, completely falling apart. Even so, Tony smiles because his suit actually worked. Exhausted and injured, he hides his face and waits for rescue, knowing that Rhodey would never stop looking for him. A few days later, James Rhodes finally finds Tony alive. Rhodey is relieved and happy to see his friend again, and soon after that, they both return safely to America. Pepper Potts is overwhelmed with relief after seeing Tony Stark alive again. She immediately tries to take him to the hospital, but Tony tells her that there are more important things he needs to do first. After spending 3 months in captivity, he knows his life has completely changed. Soon after returning home, Tony holds a press conference. Obadiah Stane also arrives there and acts very happy to see Tony alive. During the event, a man named Phil Coulson approaches Pepper and introduces himself as an agent from S.H.I.E.L.D. He hands her his card and says he wants to speak with Tony about how he survived and escaped from the terrorists. Pepper politely tells him that she will arrange a meeting later. Meanwhile, Tony shocks everyone at the press conference. Instead of giving a normal business statement, he asks all the reporters to sit down because he wants to speak honestly. Tony tells them that he personally witnessed his own weapons being used to kill innocent people and American soldiers who tried to protect him. He explains that the terrorists who captured him were armed with weapons made by Stark Industries itself. Because of that experience, Tony announces that Stark Industries will shut down its entire weapons manufacturing division. The room instantly falls silent, and everyone is stunned by the announcement. Tony says that he has realized he can offer the world something greater than destruction and explosions. Obadiah clearly hates hearing this. Before reporters can ask more questions, he quickly ends the conference and takes Tony aside. Later at the factory, Obadiah argues with Tony and says that shutting down weapons production is a terrible decision. He reminds Tony that the company's stock value will collapse if they stop making weapons, because that business is the foundation of Stark Industries. But Tony firmly disagrees. He says he no longer wants death and destruction to become the company's legacy. After seeing the damage caused by their weapons firsthand, he cannot continue pretending they are helping the world. Tony believes the company is capable of creating something much better. He then shows Obadiah the arc reactor in his chest and says they should focus on improving that technology instead. Obadiah pretends to support him and says they are a team that can accomplish anything together. However, he warns Tony that the board members are furious about the decision and that they will both face heavy criticism. He advises Tony to stay away from company matters for a while, and Tony reluctantly agrees. Soon, news spreads everywhere that Stark Industries is officially stepping away from weapons manufacturing. Pepper is watching the reports when Tony suddenly calls her downstairs to his workshop. There, Tony reveals that he has built a brand new arc reactor to replace the old one in his chest. Pepper nervously asks if that device is the reason he is still alive, and Tony confirms it is. Tony explains that the current reactor is outdated and needs to be replaced immediately. However, to do that, Pepper has to remove a wire stuck underneath the device inside his chest. The idea terrifies her. She tells Tony she can't do something like that, but Tony calmly reassures her and says he trusts her completely. After gathering her courage, Pepper carefully reaches into Tony's chest, removes the damaged wire, and installs the new arc reactor. Even though everything works perfectly, the experience completely freaks her out. She tells Tony never to ask her to do something like that again. Tony smiles and tells her that besides her, he really has nobody else he can trust. Pepper then asks what she should do with the old arc reactor. Tony casually tells her to throw it away because it's useless now. He jokes that he's not some junk collector who keeps old things around. Pepper takes the old device and leaves the workshop. Now fully focused on his new mission, Tony secretly begins developing a much more advanced Iron Man suit. Unlike before, he wants to use his technology to protect people instead of destroying them. Since he trusts almost no one anymore, he keeps the entire project hidden inside a private computer folder. He starts modifying and upgrading the crude armor he built in the cave. At the same time, far away in Afghanistan, Raza is revealed to still be alive after Tony's attack. He and his men begin collecting pieces of Tony's destroyed armor from the cave, hoping they can rebuild the technology for themselves. Back in America, Tony works day and night on improving his new suit. He repeatedly tests the flight system so he can fly more smoothly, but many of his early attempts fail badly. During one of these experiments, he begins creating stabilizer devices for the suit's hands to help control flight balance. While Tony is working, Pepper arrives with a small gift for him and tells him that Obadiah is upstairs waiting to speak with him. Tony heads upstairs where Obadiah explains that the board members believe shutting down weapons production was a huge mistake. According to them, the company may even face legal trouble because of Tony's decision. Tony doesn't seem worried and points out that he and Obadiah still own most of the company's shares anyway. But Obadiah reminds him that the board members also have power and believe Tony's new direction is dangerous for the company's future. Tony responds by saying that for the first time in his life, he's finally trying to become a responsible person. As Tony walks away, Obadiah stops him and says they need to think about the company's future. He suggests that engineers should study the arc reactor technology and create samples from it, but Tony immediately refuses, making it clear that the technology will stay with him and nobody else. Obadiah then asks if he can at least see what Tony has been building downstairs, but Tony politely shuts him down and tells him to go home and get some rest. After that, Tony returns to his workshop and continues working on the Iron Man suit in complete secrecy. After countless failed attempts, Tony Stark finally manages to fly properly, using the stabilizers built into his hands and feet. For the first time, the suit responds exactly the way he wants, and Tony is thrilled by the success. Now more confident than ever, Tony completes a brand new version of the Iron Man suit and fully integrates his AI assistant Jarvis into the system. With Jarvis connected to the armor, Tony can instantly access information, control suit functions, and monitor everything around him. Excited to test the suit properly, Tony takes off into the night sky. Flying through the city feels incredible to him, and he enjoys every second of it while speeding between buildings and clouds. Wanting to push the armor further, Tony decides to break the altitude record of the famous SR-71 jet and flies higher and higher into the atmosphere. But once he reaches extreme altitude, ice begins forming all over the suit. The freezing temperature causes the armor systems to fail, and suddenly the suit shuts down completely. Tony starts falling toward the ground at terrifying speed. Panicking, he manually opens the suit's flaps, which breaks the ice apart and restarts the system just in time. The suit powers back on, moments before impact, saving Tony from crashing to his death. Tony eventually flies back home, but while trying to land, the heavy suit crashes straight through the roof and smashes onto one of his expensive cars below. The rough landing leaves Tony bruised and exhausted. When he returns to the workshop, he notices the gift Pepper had left for him earlier. Inside the display case is the old arc reactor he told her to throw away, but instead of destroying it, Pepper Potts carefully preserved it like a trophy. Attached to it is a small message that reads, "Proof that Tony Stark has a heart." Seeing this genuinely touches Tony and makes him smile. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, Raza and his men continue rebuilding the damaged armor Tony left behind in the cave. Piece by piece, they attempt to recreate the powerful suit technology for themselves. Back in his lab, Tony realizes his current armor is still too heavy. He asks Jarvis to redesign the suit using a gold titanium alloy instead of pure iron so the armor can stay strong while becoming lighter and faster. Jarvis immediately begins working on the new design. At that moment, news starts playing on television about Stark Industries' annual charity event in Los Angeles. However, Tony notices that Obadiah Stane never invited him to the event, which leads many people to assume Tony won't attend at all. Soon after, Jarvis informs Tony that the upgraded gold and titanium suit is complete. Tony decides to paint it red and gold, joking that the flashy color scheme will somehow help him stay unnoticed. Jarvis begins painting the armor while Tony heads to the event at the Walt Disney Concert Hall. Tony quickly arrives there in one of his luxury sports cars. As soon as he walks in, Obadiah quietly warns him not to cause any trouble tonight. Inside the event, Tony grabs a drink and runs into Phil Coulson again. Coulson manages to schedule an official meeting with Tony because he still has many questions about Tony's escape from captivity. A little later, Tony notices Pepper across the room, and she looks stunning. Completely distracted by her beauty, he walks over and asks her to dance. Pepper finds the whole situation awkward, but she agrees anyway. The two share a quiet dance before eventually stepping out onto the rooftop together. It's obvious Tony has started developing real feelings for her, though both of them feel unsure about how to handle it. Feeling awkward himself, Tony eventually heads back downstairs to grab another drink. There, he unexpectedly runs into Christine Everhart again. This time, Christine shows Tony shocking photographs, proving that Stark Industries weapons are still being sold illegally on the black market. She reveals that terrorists in Gulmira are using those weapons to terrorize innocent villagers. Tony is horrified when he notices that they even have Jericho missiles. Christine tells him the photos were taken just the day before. Tony immediately insists that he never approved any new weapon sales and realizes someone inside Stark Industries must still be supplying the terrorist behind his back. Furious, Tony confronts Obadiah and directly asks if he sold weapons to the 10 Rings. But instead of answering, Obadiah avoids the question completely. Then Tony watches live news reports showing innocent people in Gulmira being attacked and driven out of their homes by terrorists. The name Gulmira hits Tony especially hard because it was the hometown of Ho Yinsen, the man who sacrificed his life to save him. Filled with anger and guilt, Tony realizes he can no longer sit back and do nothing. After testing the power of the suit's weapon systems, he becomes confident that he can stop the 10 Rings himself. So after a little more practice, Tony puts on the Iron Man armor and flies out toward Gulmira to save the innocent people trapped there. Back in Gulmira, Abu Bakr and his men are brutally attacking innocent villagers. They drag people out of their homes, kill anyone who resists, and even take women and children hostage. At one point, a young boy tries to run toward his injured father, but Abu angrily orders his men to shoot him. But before they can pull the trigger, Tony Stark suddenly crashes into the village in full Iron Man armor, making an unforgettable entrance. The terrorists are completely shocked as Tony starts taking them down one by one with overwhelming force. Some of Abu's men quickly point their guns at the helpless villagers, hoping to use them as shields, but Tony instantly responds with the suit's advanced targeting weapons and eliminates the terrorists with perfect precision before they can hurt anyone. The villagers are stunned and relieved as Iron Man saves them. Terrified, Abu tries calling Raza for help, but before he can finish the call, Tony smashes through a wall, grabs Abu, and throws him out in front of the angry villagers before flying away. Furious after everything Abu had done to them, the villagers immediately surround him. Tony then heads toward the hidden stockpile of missiles and weapons belonging to the 10 Rings. Suddenly, a tank fires directly at him, blasting him out of the sky. Tony quickly recovers, turns toward the tank, and destroys it with a single missile. After that, he wipes out the remaining terrorists and destroys all the Jericho missiles and weapons stored there. From a distance, Raza watches Iron Man fly away and realizes Tony Stark is still alive. Meanwhile, the US Air Force in California detects reports of an unknown flying object attacking terrorists in Afghanistan. The military has no idea what the object is because it's too small to properly appear on radar. James Rhodes arrives at the control center, where other officers explain that an unidentified aircraft has entered restricted airspace. To investigate, the military sends 2 F-22 Raptor fighter jets after Tony. Mistaking Iron Man for a threat, the pilots begin attacking him. Realizing the situation is getting out of control, Tony quickly calls Rhodey and reveals that he's actually inside the suit. Rhodey is completely shocked and immediately orders the pilots to stop firing. But during the chaos, one of the fighter jets accidentally crashes after colliding during the pursuit. The pilot ejects safely, but his parachute fails to open. At the last possible second, Tony catches up to him mid-air and manually deploys the parachute, saving the pilot's life. After making sure he's safe, Tony finally heads back home. Later, Pepper walks down into Tony's workshop and notices that the entrance gates are badly damaged. Inside, she finds Tony struggling to remove the Iron Man armor because he designed the suit too tightly around his body. Pepper is shocked when she sees bullet marks and damage all over the armor, realizing Tony had actually been fighting real terrorists. At the same time, Obadiah Stane secretly travels to meet Raza. It is finally revealed that Obadiah was the one illegally selling Stark Industries weapons to the Ten Rings all along. Obadiah angrily tells Raza that he should have killed Tony when they first captured him. Raza responds by saying that Obadiah simply didn't pay enough money for Tony's death. Then Obadiah asks about the metal suit Tony escaped with. Raza takes him inside and shows him the damaged armor pieces collected from the cave. He explains that Tony only escaped because of that suit and claims the technology is incredibly powerful. Raza even says that with such armor, they could dominate all of Asia. However, Raza understands that Obadiah's real goal is taking complete control of Stark Industries. So he proposes a partnership. He will hand over the suit designs, and Obadiah will rebuild the armor and make it operational again. But Obadiah has no intention of sharing power with anyone. Using a special sonic device, he suddenly paralyzes Raza on the spot. Then he orders his men to kill all the remaining members of the Ten Rings there. After eliminating Raza and taking control of the armor technology, Obadiah returns home and secretly forces Stark Industries scientists to begin rebuilding Tony's original suit. Meanwhile, Tony Stark asks Pepper Potts to go to Stark Industries and secretly hack into the company's main computer system. Tony wants proof showing who has been illegally selling weapons to the Ten Rings. Trusting Tony completely, Pepper agrees and heads to the office. Once there, she secretly connects a drive into Obadiah Stane's computer and gains access to his private files. While searching through the data, Pepper discovers a hidden project called Sector 16, where Obadiah has been rebuilding and upgrading Tony's original Iron Man armor from the cave. Even worse, she also finds recorded footage proving that Obadiah was the one who arranged Tony's kidnapping by the Ten Rings. Realizing the truth, Pepper quickly starts copying all the evidence. But before she can finish, Obadiah suddenly walks into the office. Thankfully, he doesn't immediately realize what she's doing, and Pepper cleverly removes the drive before leaving the room. However, the moment Obadiah opens his computer, he notices the copied files and instantly understands that Pepper stole his data. He immediately goes after her, but before he can catch up, Pepper runs into Phil Coulson, the S.H.I.E.L.D. agent she had a scheduled meeting with. Using the opportunity, Pepper quickly leaves with Coulson and escapes from Obadiah. Furious, Obadiah heads down to his scientists, including William Ginter Riva, who tells him they still cannot figure out how to power the massive suit. Obadiah angrily reminds them that Tony Stark built an arc reactor inside a cave with limited resources. Frustrated, the scientist replies, "Well, I'm not Tony Stark." Back at home, Tony receives a call from Pepper warning him about Obadiah. But before Tony can react, Obadiah suddenly arrives and uses a sonic paralysis device on him. Tony instantly collapses, unable to move or even speak. Obadiah then brutally removes the arc reactor from Tony's chest so he can use it to power his own armor, leaving Tony there to die. At the same time, Pepper calls James Rhodes and tells him that Obadiah is trying to kill Tony. She then heads towards Sector 16 with Coulson and other S.H.I.E.L.D. agents to stop Obadiah before it's too late. Meanwhile, Tony struggles to survive without the arc reactor. Barely able to breathe, he drags himself down to his workshop because he remembers that Pepper had preserved his old arc reactor instead of destroying it. Using the last of his strength, Tony reaches the old device and reconnects it to his chest, saving his life once again. Soon after, Rhodey arrives at the workshop. Tony immediately asks where Pepper is because he knows she's in danger too. Rhodey explains that she's with Coulson and they're heading to arrest Obadiah. Hearing this, Tony realizes Pepper could be killed before they even get there. So without wasting another second, he puts on the Iron Man suit and flies off to save her. Meanwhile, Pepper and the SHIELD team reach Sector 16 to arrest Obadiah, but they are already too late. Obadiah has successfully activated his massive armored suit using Tony's stolen arc reactor. Unlike Tony's sleek armor, Obadiah's ironmonger suit is enormous, heavily armored, and incredibly powerful. Obadiah immediately attacks Pepper, trying to kill her before she can expose him. She barely manages to escape outside the facility. But just as Obadiah is about to crush her, Tony suddenly arrives in the Iron Man suit and slams into him, dragging him away from Pepper. A huge battle breaks out between the two armored suits. Since Tony is using his older arc reactor again, his suit cannot operate at full power, putting him at a major disadvantage. Obadiah's larger armor overwhelms Tony and repeatedly beats him down. Tony tries escaping into the sky, but Obadiah follows him and proudly says that Tony may have improved the original design, but he improved it even more. When Tony realizes he cannot overpower him directly, he quickly comes up with another plan. He tells Jarvis that they need to freeze Obadiah's suit, using the last remaining power in his armor. Tony flies higher and higher into the freezing upper atmosphere, forcing Obadiah to chase him. Tony's own suit barely survives the extreme cold, but eventually the ice causes Obadiah's armor systems to freeze and fail completely. The ironmonger suit loses power and crashes toward the ground. Tony barely manages to stabilize himself and return safely, but the fight still isn't over. Obadiah survives the fall and attacks Tony again with brutal force. Since the ironmonger armor is still stronger, Tony can only survive by using smoke and debris to temporarily hide from him. Then Tony realizes they are fighting directly above the massive arc reactor powering the Stark Industries facility. He quickly contacts Pepper and tells her to overload the reactor system. While Pepper prepares to do that, Tony distracts Obadiah and damages the suit's targeting system. Obadiah opens his helmet and arrogantly tells Tony that he can never defeat him. But at that exact moment, Tony tells Pepper to activate the reactor overload. Suddenly, a massive wave of energy erupts upward from the giant arc reactor. Tony gets blasted away by the explosion, but the full force of the energy strikes Obadiah directly. The overloaded energy completely destroys the ironmonger suit, sending Obadiah crashing into the reactor itself before a gigantic explosion consumes everything around him. Thankfully, Tony survives because his suit still had just enough power left to protect him. The next day, news spreads everywhere that Iron Man saved both the city and the people of Gulmira from terrorists. People across the world begin seeing him as a hero. Before a press conference, Agent Coulson gives Tony a carefully prepared cover story, so nobody discovers that he is actually Iron Man. But when Tony steps in front of the reporters, he ignores the script completely. After a short pause, he simply looks at the crowd and says, "I am Iron Man." Everyone is left completely shocked, and that's where the movie ends. In the post-credit scene, Nick Fury arrives at Tony's house. Fury tells him that he is not the only superhero in the world, and says he wants to discuss something called the Avengers Initiative. And with that, Iron Man finally comes to an end. Tony Stark started as a man who only cared about money, fame, and powerful weapons. But after seeing how his creations were destroying innocent lives, he chose to change himself and use his intelligence to protect people instead of hurting them. Tony Stark proved that anyone can change, no matter who they used to be. In the end, being a hero isn't about fame or power. It's about choosing to do the right thing. If you enjoyed this recap, share it with a friend who loves superhero movies, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more recaps like this. Thanks for watching.